So the demo we would like to walk you through is of a fictitious robotics firm out of Boston named MOAD, or the Massachusetts Omni Automated Devices Company. They were doing very well selling high-end industry-focused robotics through the 80s and the 90s and even into the 2000s, but sales started to lag as of late. And a decision was made to relaunch the company with a more consumer focus to capture the booming IoT and high-end home robotics market, and the big booming tech market that's out there, including a new online sales marketplace. So really a complete relaunch of the entire company. MOAD reached out to VMware for help, who in turn told them about VMware Cloud Foundation, which would allow them the flexibility, the efficiency, and the power they would need to make such a transition. In this demo, Chris, John, Matt, and I will be playing the roles of Cloud Administrator, Operations Manager, Network Manager, and with me playing and starting the demo as the Dev Manager. Okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started on the demo. Let's start the demo by looking at what I, the developer, and my SRE team get to see. Remember, for me, it's all about flexibility and self-service and getting things on demand when I want it, being able to start and stop them and deploy them and delete them and figure out the cost of them, all without getting everybody else engaged. And VMware Cloud Foundation with the vRealize piece all tied together allows me to do that. So we're going to go ahead and look at the services I have access to. Because I'm a developer, I only get access to basically the service broker or the catalog. So if I go into Service Broker and look at the catalog I have here, this is all controlled by my cloud administration team. So Chris and his team control what I can see, when I can see it, where I can deploy it, how I can do that. And he's going to go into details of how that gets set up on the back end. We're just going to look at the front end here, the piece that I get to see. And you can see in this example here for this demo, we have some really simple catalog items available. In this case, we're going to be deploying this one here, which is our retail shopping cart app. Now, this is kind of the bread and butter of my commercial side. It allows me to spin up new production environments if I need to. It allows me to modify the production environment as necessary, whether it's resizing it, add more components to it, add more front ends, etc. It also allows me to, which I do very often, bring up other iterations of it, either old versions, new versions, etc., so that I can do testing or more development or whatever it is for my different development teams. So let's go ahead and look at how that works. I'm going to go ahead and request this particular catalog item. And again, this is all controllable. Let me zoom in here so you can get a better view. This is all controllable from and flexible from what the cloud administrators are going to allow me to do. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and give this deployment a name, and we'll just call it the TS demo. We'll call it demo 2 and give it a description. And I'm going to go down here and start calculating the cost of this because it does take a few minutes or a few seconds, and I don't want to be waiting for that later. So I'm going to go and calculate the cost. That's going to go off and get the cost of this particular deployment before I deploy it, so I know, is this something that I'm interested in doing or not. I can choose which project this is associated with. It. Again, Chris is going to talk about that. I can choose the size of the nodes. We're looking at really small nodes for maybe a quick little test environment. Are we going to go for a full large-scale environment that maybe is going to be more permanent? I have control over things like passwords, number of threads, but here's the ones that are really more interesting. I can also control things like, and again, totally configurable based on my needs and what Chris is willing and able to give me, the front-end cluster size. So I may want to test this out with a large set of front-end servers, and in this case, it would be a list of 4 front-end servers with a load balancer. Or I may want to just do 2 front-end web servers with a load balancer. Or in this case, just just a straightforward load balancer, front-end server, front-end web server, nothing else, right? So I can change that as necessary. You can see also that I can determine where I want this to be deployed, right? This is huge for me. Do I want to throw this up in AWS? Because we do have some instances of different components of our production environment running in AWS on EC2 or in Azure. Or do we want to deploy this to my VMware Cloud Foundation environment and use vSphere, right? I have that ability to choose multiple cloud locations, and again, totally configurable.
Chris is going to show that off, right? In this case, I've gotten my price, my daily cost of doing a medium with a small front-end cluster. The cost is all based on the size, the amount, where I'm deploying it, number of CPUs, the amount of memory, the storage I'm going to need, etc. I'm going to go ahead and submit this and go ahead and get that deployment started. Okay, you can see it's started right now. You can see I deployed one a little while ago and sent it to AWS. We also have other deployments here that I want to look at. So while that particular one is deploying, let's go look at our production environment. This is actually our production shopping cart app. From a user point of view, from a developer point of view, I have access into all of the deployments that I've seen that I've deployed in the past. In this case, I can click on one of these components and view the information associated with it. I can see things like, the IP address, the endpoints. I can look at the storage associated with this one. I can see the network configurations associated with it, and then any custom properties. And those custom properties are going to become important later because these custom properties help drive some of the attributes or some of the behaviors of how this thing is going to get deployed and how it's going to behave after it's been deployed. I can look at the history. When did we create it? It got created, this particular instance of it got created about, 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? I can also look at anything else that was changed. So at one point, John Diaz decided from an operations standpoint that this thing needed to be resized. I can see what he resized it to. It's now 2 by 2, right? I have the ability to monitor my cost from here. What is my up-to-date monthly cost of, my SQL or the front-end web server, right? And I can see how that cost is breaking down, right? In this case, how it's breaking down across, let's see, the compute, the storage, and any additional charges. Those additional charges could be support charges, could be location fees, could be licensing costs, right? Again, that's all configurable on that back end. I can also monitor it, right? And that's something from a developer's standpoint. I am in charge of making sure, along with John and the rest of the team, to making sure that these things are running correctly. And I have the ability to get a quick bird's eye view of these deployments, right? So in this case, I can look at, let's go to my SQL server because that's a little bit more interesting. I can look at high-level information of the CPU, the amount of memory being used, right? The IOPS from the storage standpoint, and even the network, right? And if I see something that's a little odd, like, ooh, I don't like the way this looks here, I can go ahead and zoom into it, right? From that point, I can zoom into it, start saying, okay, I don't know what was going on here, but this doesn't look right. And then I can reach out to John and his operations team and say, hey, I think we may have a problem here. What are you guys seeing? And because we're all looking at the same thing, this information is coming from John's operations system. He can then look into it and zoom into it. And we'll get into how John monitors that environment. But what I really want to do is I want to transition over to our cloud administrators and over to Chris and have him talk to you a little bit about how this all came together, right? All we're seeing so far is what I get to see. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the back end to really make this thing shine.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And hopefully you guys can see my screen okay?
We can see it great.
Great. So, Dave, obviously, he's a consumer of mine, and I want to make sure that he can get to deployments and get to the things that he needs very quickly without having to make a lot of decisions and things like that. I mean, Dave's better off, if you get to know Dave, that he's just better off working, right? Not answering questions. So, I want to make it very easy for him. So now you're going to come into our automation platform, and me as an administrator, I'm going to kind of show you how I make that easy by carving up the environment. So easy decisions can be made. I want it to go into production or dev, or I want to go into AWS or vSphere, as Dave showed. But in the back end, that's really happening in a way that is governed and controlled. So not only can we control cost, but we can control placement of where those machines go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Cloud Assembly. And this is really the tool that I use as an administrator to make that carving up of the environment happen. You can see Dave's deployment still running here, and it's building up. But we're going to talk a little bit about, like, how did I carve this environment up so I can give Dave all of the options that he needs to be able to do these deployments of our retail shopping cart. So the first thing you'll see is we have these cloud accounts, and cloud accounts are things like AWS, Google, Azure, and you'll see here our VCF environment that is backed obviously by vCenter. I'm going to create those and basically plumb those into Cloud Assembly, so then I can start to have targets to deploy our applications and workloads to. So you'll see here, once I've created these cloud accounts, and you see I have several for both Azure, AWS, and our vCenter environments and different workload domains within inside of VCF. I want to make those available to different projects. And as Dave showed you before, he selected projects as a part of that deployment when he was doing his deployment of the shopping cart application, and he was part of the field demo project. You'll see we have other projects in here, and these are just different groups of users within inside of our organization that need to deploy things. So the marketing team has theirs, the sales team has theirs as well. And obviously they need to deploy the assets, but I want to make sure that I keep kind of everybody separated when I need to, or together when they need to be together. So if I was part of the field demo and the marketing project, I would see all of those catalog items. But Dave was only a part of the field demo because he deals with our shopping cart application, so he only saw the field demo resources. Now, when I come into Cloud Zones is how I take all of those cloud accounts and I make them smaller targets for assignment into projects. So you'll see here, I've got a Phoenix zone. I've got a couple of AWS and Azure different cloud zones. And you'll notice here that I've got tags associated to some of these, right? AWS, Azure. You'll see if I just pop in real quick to my vSphere environment, I can see that I've got a resource pool that I've tagged with environment vSphere here. Keep that in mind because we're going to show you how using those tags I can really pinpoint where these deployments go. But you'll see I have these cloud zones, and one thing I'll show you with the project. So Dave, he has the ability, in that blueprint he was deploying, to be able to select Azure or AWS or vSphere. Well, that's because I've set him up where he's got some cloud zones for those particular environments that he can deploy to. So that's really how you start to take those big, large accounts that you have for different workload domains in VCF, or maybe some public cloud targets within Azure or Amazon or Google, and really start to bring those into smaller little buckets that then can be assigned to different groups within the organization. We also have what's called flavor mappings, and flavor mappings are like t-shirt sizes, right? So Dave, when he was going through his selection of as some of the inputs for the deployment, he asked if they, what size nodes do you want? And that was small, medium, and large. Well, that is equal to a flavor within inside the platform. So now I'm defining as the administrator what large is, what medium is, and what small is, so I can really maintain the size of machines and the consumption of the resources that I have to provide to the different projects within the organization. And then we have image mappings, and image mappings is a way for me to simply say, hey, an Ubuntu 16 image in Amazon is the same thing as it is in these different VCF workload domains. And it gives me the ability to, have similar images across all of my multi-cloud environment. So now when a requester wants to request an Ubuntu workload, or maybe they need to use Ubuntu as a portion of the shopping cart application in this example, I can make that deployable in any cloud environment, not just on-prem, but in multi-cloud, because I have similar images defined to this image mapping. Network profiles are what you would think they would be, a way to target the networks that I want to deploy to. You'll see here, just like within the cloud zones, I have different tags associated to this, because again, when we get into how blueprinting works, you're going to see how tags make it very easy for me to target and pinpoint places where I want different workloads or resources to be deployed to. And the same thing from a storage profile perspective. We have different tiers of storage within inside of our vSphere environment. And so I'm able to target those particular storage environments by using tags and, sorry, picked the wrong one there, by using different tags and associations to different storage arrays across my vSphere environment. So that's really how I started to carve up this multi-cloud world that we live in now in MOAD. And so I'm going to show you now, since you see how the infrastructure is carved up, what can we do with that infrastructure? And this is where we start to get into the blueprinting side. So I'm actually going to pull up the blueprint that Dave deployed a little bit earlier. Oh, wrong one. Let me get back here. Let me find my load balanced open cart. There we go. So you'll see here that I've got a blueprint, and this is where we really, and I come in and I start to design the deployments that are needed for the particular applications that Dave needs to deploy for his team, right? So this is the design canvas. You'll see over on the left-hand side, I have different objects that I can use. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. In the middle is kind of the architectural view, visual view of this particular blueprint. And then on the right-hand side is where I have my infrastructure as code. So to go back to the left-hand side real quick over here, you'll see we have all different kinds of objects that are available to be drug onto the canvas, right? We've got things from Microsoft, we've got objects from Google, we've AWS, vSphere, NSX specific, and then we have what's called, this cloud agnostic. So at any point in time, if I pull over a cloud agnostic object into the canvas, that means that that machine or load balancer or network, security group, or volume is going to be able to be deployed across any cloud environment that I have plumbed into my cloud assembly or my automation platform. So that gives me a lot of options to create one set of instructions and have that to be able to deploy into any of my targets, whether that be AWS, Azure, or vSphere, as Dave had that option when he was going through his request. You also see here, again, we can do native objects for AWS if we wanted to do an S3 bucket as a part of this deployment, or I can also integrate with Ansible and Puppet from a config management perspective to really do advanced configuration of the objects that we're deploying out into the different environments. Again, you'll see here from the middle that we have our kind of design. That changes as I start to drag things over. You can see that. And then if I drag something over here, you'll also see that it'll start to create and build out the code for me within inside of my environment. So if I click on that, you'll start to see it will build in the machine for me. And then I can start to make easy decisions. You'll see here's my flavor mappings. Here's my image and flavor mappings both. And now I can start actually building upon this machine if I want to. Though I don't want to do that right now, I'm going to get that out of here. But you can still start to see how easy it is to start building that infrastructure as code without having to really know a lot of code to go with it. But if you're really good at the YAML format and you want to just build this blueprint straight out, you can start to do that, and you can start to see all the different options that you have. One thing I want to point out, though, is remember when we were talking about tagging, right? One of the cool things with tags is I can now start to pinpoint where I want to place workloads based on a selection. So here, if Dave would have selected AWS, it was going to use the environment.aws tag. So then now, as selections are being made, it'll equate to different tags within the environment that I've carved up. And now I can start to really pinpoint where that is and create governance around that. So if I don't want Dave to be able to go to Azure, I simply take Azure out of the input options and it's not available. But the cool thing is with that, I could make it available for Dave, but not available for other projects or vice versa. So you have a lot of control to be able to do different kinds of placement, different kinds of security boundaries, and really set that governance at the request time for the individual user as a part of the project. So I'll close that since we've talked a little bit about, how we carve up the environment, talked to, how do we create that instruction set that's cloud agnostic, that can be, that you utilize those tags to deploy machines, wherever we want. And then I'll pop back over and just show you that, hey, we also have the ability, just like in the request catalog that Dave used, is to see all of the different deployments that have been done across all of the projects within inside the environment. Now, because I'm an administrator, I saw all the deployments for all of the projects, where Dave would only see his deployments for the project that he's in. But just like Dave saw, you can see the history here. I can see the cost as well, so I know cost against different deployments. And then obviously I can see the same monitoring that Dave can see throughout from the catalog side. So I get that same information in my tool that I use that's called Cloud Assembly to build all of this instruction set and carve up the environment. And Dave gets to see that same view as well. But you'll notice here that we're seeing some high CPU and some interesting things happening with this. So I think it's probably time for me to hand this over to my friend John Diaz over on the ops side, so he can really dive in to the performance of our production workload that's running and diagnose whether or not we need to make some changes, whether that's scaling up the environment, which we can do through our automation platform, or if we need to make some changes on the individual nodes themselves. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand it over to John.
All right, thanks, Chris. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll dive right in. And one of the things that we'll start looking at, so just assume that Dave, has this deployment running. He's like, man, there's something wrong with the production shopping cart that I deployed in, earlier today or last week or whatever. So what Dave understands is that the shopping cart is really a deployment as defined in vRealize automation. So vRealize operations actually understands that deployment. And so I can actually go to deployment types and see the different deployments that we've picked up from a monitoring standpoint. And so operationally, I can communicate much easier with Dave because I can translate what is important to him into what I can manage or how I'm managing that in my environment. So we'll go to that production shopping cart, for example. And one of the things that you'll see here is a representation of not only all the components of the shopping cart deployment, both from the perspective of all the objects that are related to the blueprints, the zones, and the organization, and the things that Chris talked about in terms of those constructs for VRA. But then if we look, we also have components related to the infrastructure, which I manage as a virtual infrastructure administrator and my team. And then also I have some components related to the application stack itself so that I can have awareness of Dave's world and the stuff that's running in my environment, at least from the capability to be able to do some high-level troubleshooting or at least have visibility into the applications that are running. So those applications that are running in Dave's deployment are automatically discovered as they're deployed, and as vRealize operations starts to pick up and start monitoring, it looks for known applications running in those and automatically creates objects and relationships based on that. And let me show you what I mean. If I go to the metric tab here for the deployment, and actually let me switch to a virtual machine. So I'll switch to the front-end virtual machine, which is the web server. And the reason I know it's the web server is if I look at the virtual machine relationships and I go down to the OS and go out one more level to the services, I can see there's a Apache HTTP service running on that server. And so therefore I know that there's a web server that is running as part of that deployment. Same thing for the SQL environment. I can see the components running on that. And what you'll notice is I have a nice visibility end to end from the service, the OS, the virtual machine, and then all the components that support that virtual machine from the standpoint of the hypervisor itself and the virtual infrastructure, which means I can do more effective troubleshooting of any problems that Dave may encounter with that. And I can also relate that to any problems that might crop up in the cloud management world as part of the VRA infrastructure as well. So I can look at the projects, the blueprints that it was deployed from, and so forth. One of the other things that is important to note here is that I have ability to see the compliance posture of this application. So this deployment is a retail shopping cart, and one of the important things is that and for many customers and for us especially is that we take credit card transactions over that website. And so we need to be able to understand our PCI compliance posture for that virtual environment. Is this running in a PCI compliant area? It's our production shopping cart. If it were a test shopping cart, I wouldn't really care that much probably. But since it is production, I want to know. And we can do that by these industry benchmarks which VMware has provided as part of the solution that I can optionally install and say, oh, tell me, what my PCI security standard or my compliance is. What are the findings for that environment? And I'm just looking at it broadly here from the entire infrastructure, but I could certainly narrow it down to individual. I could look at the compliance from a project standpoint, from a data center standpoint, whatever I was doing, whatever made sense. So I can see, for example, some front end servers, okay, that are running those retail shopping cart services have PCI compliance hardening guide findings that make that virtual machine non-compliant. And when I come in here, I can see that, for example, here are all the findings. They're translated as symptoms, but I can see what the findings are, and it'll tell me exactly, what the setting, the configuration setting is that is being evaluated, what the value is, and what the value should be for that. What's cool about that is if I look at, for example, let's look at the hosts that support that application. So let me go to the host system. And so the host that this particular front end runs on, just double click on that to switch context. And if I look at the alerts for that host, sorry, let me do that one more time and refresh. Need to probably replace my mouse batteries or something. I'm not sure. Oh, I need to close this alert. Sorry about that. Okay, so when I look at the alerts on this host and I look at the definition and I see, here's my PCI compliance, the vSphere security configuration guide. Let's look at the vSphere security configuration guide, for example. When I look at this, one thing that I notice here is that I had a violation of the vSphere security configuration guide. This alert was actually canceled. Now I'll explain in a minute what happened here, but this particular alert is tied to an automatic remediation that will go out when this alert is triggered and will automatically reconfigure all of the misconfigured findings. For example, you see like firewall settings, NTP settings, things related to ESXi shell timeouts and login permissions and so forth, SSH. And so all of these are critical things to tighten the security of the environment. And this little link right here, which is grayed out, if this alert were active and I wanted to manually do that, it would actually launch an orchestrator workflow, go out and remediate those items for me, and then I would be good. As it is, we've turned on automatic remediation, and anytime someone either purposely or accidentally makes a configuration change to an ESXi host, it drifts away from that compliant configuration. We'll automatically go ahead and fix that. Now, another thing that you may have noticed with vRealize operations is from this home screen, for example, it may have caught your eye that we have this visibility into costs. And that cost visibility is something that provides not only cost for running your virtual infrastructure more cost effectively. So I can see things like I have savings opportunities here by reclaiming unused resource or over provisioned resources. But it also works from the standpoint of cost for vRealize automation deployments. And so what I mean by that, if I look at my cloud automation project price overview screen, I can see the different projects as were pointed out earlier in the demonstration. And you may recall when Dave did the cost calculation, it showed an estimated cost for the deployment that he was about to deploy. But once he deploys it, we can also keep track of the ongoing costs for that. And so you'll see like field demo, for example, here. That's the project that he launched it in. And then we have our production shopping cart, right, which is part of that. And we can get costs for that as well. So not only can we see costs for the virtual infrastructure, we can see costs from the standpoint of the deployments, the projects, et cetera. We can also see the cloud automation environment, like how many of those projects do we have, how many deployments, and then we can break that down and get more details about the zones, the project lists, the VMs that are part of those deployments. We can see if there are any heavy hitters in terms of memory and CPU usage, the health of various deployments or blueprints, virtual machines that were deployed as part of a particular blueprint, which may indicate that there's some issue that we could correct at the blueprint level, for example. So very powerful. Won't go into much more detail here, but everything I've shown you so far has been, there's a lot of information, and I've kind of gone to different parts of the UI to show you that information. But what's nice is I can create a dashboard for my retail production shopping cart that shows all of that critical information in one place. So here I have the relationships between the deployment, the VMs in that deployment, the services running on those VMs and the OS, for example. I have selected KPIs that maybe my business or the IT organization is accountable for to the business via some SLAs or some understanding that, hey, we need a certain amount of availability, or we need to maintain a certain response time, for our users. So I have this little user experience graph, which is a capability telling me how long it takes the website to respond. And then you'll notice that some of these KPIs are related to the virtual infrastructure. Some are related to the OS itself. Some are related to the application. Like this is the number of web Apache HTTP threads or connections running, or that's actually the database. And then down here I have the Apache Busy Workers. Those are coming from the services themselves. So I have complete end-to-end or full stack visibility, application awareness down to the virtual infrastructure and even out to physical components if I want to, along with that costing information. So this dashboard kind of summarizes my view as the VI admin and all the things that I need to know about keeping Dave's applications healthy. Now at this point, I'll turn it over to our network and security admin, Matt Just. He'll take you through the rest of the demonstration. So Matt.
Thanks, John. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so as the network and security administrator here at MOAD, what I'd like to do is show you what I really enjoy as part of VMware Cloud Foundation is being able to analyze the applications and monitor the applications within the product. So I'm going to come over to our application section here, and we're going to take a look at the applications that Chris and John were just covering along with Dave. So I'm going to focus in on our MOAD application. So here we can see our MOAD production shopping cart application that is deployed that we're monitoring within the product. I'm going to go ahead and click on the actual shopping application. And here, what we're going to be able to see is everything that's going on within the application from a network and security aspect. We're going to have an overview of any type of actual events that may be occurring within the application. We can see our incoming traffic, our outgoing traffic, and we can see what our distribution as far as what any types of changes that we've seen over the last 24 hours. I can also see how many active flows I currently have in the application and any flows that have problems, such as flows that are not protected by the NSX distributed firewall, or flows that may be degraded from a TCP flow round trip time perspective. We're also going to be able to see any type of access from countries, based on the GeoIP that might be accessing our application. And we're going to also monitor and be able to view what VMs or physical IPs or Kubernetes services make up our application. Now, in this case, we can see that this application consists of 2 virtual machines. And as I scroll down and focus in on the actual application topology, we can see that we have our different tiers. We have our web tier, we have our database tier, and then we can see all of our active flows that are communicating between our tiers. Also, flows going out to the internet, flows to our shared virtual resources such as Active Directory or DNS, shared physical resources, and then other applications or entities within our data center that may be communicating with our application. Now, we can also take a look at and have a good understanding from a security perspective on what are our unprotected flows within our application. So when I click on unprotected flows, what I can now see here within the product is that it allows me to see where I actually have flows that are unprotected and not microsegmented. So in this case here, I can see that I've got flows that are unprotected and that I need to go through and do some microsegmentation planning and implement these firewall rules within the NSX distributed firewall. I also can take a look and see if I have any degraded flows. Now at this time, I do not have any degraded flows in my application, so my application is performing as expected. So I do not have any issues with TCP flow round trip times within the application. Further on, we can also take a look at what's new within our application. So again, I can take a look and monitor my application to see if anything changes within the last 24 hours. So here I can see my incoming traffic, my outgoing traffic. I can see that I've had an increase in traffic of 4.2%. Same thing with my outgoing traffic at about 4.3%. I have not dropped any flows from the distributed firewall. I've not had any type of analytic events or new members added to the application. We also have not, I can see that I've not had any external services accessed in the last 24 hours or services accessed by the internet in the last 24 hours being a newly deployed application, along with any application ports used in the last 24 hours. Moving on to our metrics, this allows me to monitor the application from a network throughput perspective. So here I can see our 2 different virtual machines that make up our application. I can see the names of the virtual machines, and I can also see the network traffic rate for each virtual machine so that I can monitor and ensure that I'm providing enough throughput for these applications or for these virtual machines within the application. Further down, we're going to take a look at our flows. So this is actually going to provide me with information on the top talkers by flows in the last 24 hours. So I can see my 2 different virtual machines in my application, the associated number of flows for each virtual machine, and the sum of total flow traffic. I can also see if I had any associated distributed firewall rules touching any flows active in my application. I would see those here listed here on top application flows by rules. But as we can see, we just have our default rule that is touching all the flows. So this is actually considered an unprotected application because we're doing a allow any all with the actual default rule within NSX's distributed firewall. Now, the important part is once we actually have and start to understand how our application is communicating is to be able to plan security and implement microsegmentation within our application, securing all flows, traffic east-west, and north-south. So here I can see, when I look at the service graph, I can see my different tiers that make up my application. So I'm going to focus in on my database tier. And here I can see all of my outgoing, incoming, and bidirectional traffic flows occurring within my application as they're communicating to the internet, shared virtual resources, shared physical, virtual, and other physical resources in the data center. I can also see inter-app communication between our database tier and our web tier. So from here, I can actually click on my database tier. And this is now going to pull up and show me and give me an overview of how many services are in the group for the database tier, how many external services are accessed, how many flows do I have incoming and outgoing for my DB tier. I can see my different endpoints and the associated number of flows, the sum of the total flow traffic, and the max of the network traffic rate that is occurring for each one of my endpoints within my database tier. More importantly, what I get is I get my recommended firewall rules. So if I click on the recommended firewall rules, this is now going to show me, based on a understanding, a full analysis of all flows within the application, it's going to build out all of the suggested firewall rules in a whitelisted approach that I can now take and I can export and import into NSX and apply at the distributed firewall level and implement microsegmentation very easily. So with this rule set, these 18 firewall rules, I can implement these and add my implicit deny all. And once I do that within the NSX distributed firewall, I have now simply microsegmented and isolated my database tier within my application. Going back to our application, I can also take a look and have an understanding of the, from a traffic distribution standpoint, I can understand how much traffic I have going east-west, how much of that is actually switched over the network east-west, how much of that is routed, how much is VM to VM communication from an east-west perspective. If I have any virtual machines or services and so on that are running within the same physical host, I would be able to see that. Obviously, we don't have any virtual machines running on the same physical host. And then I can also see my north-south traffic. So this could be going to the internet, or it could be active traffic going to other entities within the data center that would be classified as north-south. Now, lastly, what I can also do is I can come in and I can take a look at, being that this application is a production shopping cart, from a PCI compliance perspective, when it comes to network and security, I can come in and I can choose the actual application. So I'm going to come over and choose my MOAD application that we're focusing on here that we deployed. And I'm going to go ahead and do an analysis of this over the last 24 hours. So I'm going to hit assess. And what this is going to do is this is now going to assess our application from a PCI DSS perspective. So we can see the various sections here that we're taking into consideration for our application. As I scroll down, each one of these boxes are broken out to show me various components that make up for each section of PCI. So I can see for section 1.3.1, I can see my 2 different virtual machines. As I scroll down further, we can see if I had any security groups of the virtual machines deployed, or virtual machine security groups, or virtual machine by security tags. I would also see that in here, but since we have not implemented any security on this newly deployed application, we do not see any of that. Further down, I can understand my network flows similar to what we were looking at from a microsegmentation planning perspective, and I can focus in on those specific flows and see how those flows apply from the various sections of PCI. But more importantly, I can see all of my active flows from a source and destination perspective. I can see various components such as the source VM, the destination VM, the flow type, the source IP, the destination IP, the port, protocol, and various other resources that we can see that are actually coming from vCenter. So I can actually see my source layer 2 networks, my destination layer 2 networks, resource pools, source cluster, destination cluster, same thing with the data centers. And more importantly, if I start to deploy firewall rules that are actually touching these flows, I can actually see the applied firewall rules that are associated or touching these flows that are configured within the NSX distributed firewall. Now, as I go back, I can also see my clear text protocol flows. So these are going to show me source and destination and show me that any type of flows that I have active that or have been active that are clear text protocol flows. So I'll want to analyze these as a security admin and determine if any of these need encryption, because this is a retail shopping cart production application, that I may need to encrypt this traffic because of its requirements to meet PCI compliance. Now I can also take a look, and as I implement microsegmentation, I can come into the PCI compliance dashboard for this application, and I can take a look and see what firewall rules are applied on internal traffic, firewall rules that are applied on incoming traffic and outgoing traffic. I can also view any type of security changes that may occur within this application. So if anyone goes in and makes any security tag membership changes or group membership changes, or actually changes anything with the firewall rules after I sign them from a microsegmentation standpoint, I can actually see all those changes and track those. And I can provide this to our auditor when he comes in and does audits on our PCI from a PCI standpoint on any applications that we have that require us to meet PCI compliance. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my portion, and I'm going to send this back to Dave.
That's the end of our demo. I hope it showed you how vRealize is a critical part of and adds tremendous value to any VMware Cloud Foundation deployment. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.